My daughter texted me, "Happy belated birthday," 11 days late, then asked in the same breath whether I'd already mailed the check for the boys' summer camp. I stopped paying the mortgage on her house that same morning. By dinner time, she'd called me 31 times. Let me tell you how a woman who spent her whole life saying yes finally learned to say one small, quiet no. And honey, that little word cost me more sleep than any yes ever did. I'm 73 years old. I live alone now in a tidy 2-bedroom ranch in the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, with a porch my husband built with his own hands the spring before his knees gave out. His name was Walt. We were married 46 years before the cancer took him. Slow and mean. 4 winters back. People always say the house feels empty after. What they don't tell you is that it isn't empty at all. It's full of him. His reading glasses still sit folded on the windowsill where he left them. I keep meaning to put them away and I never do. Walt and I weren't rich the way people imagine rich. We didn't have yachts or a place in Florida. But Walt was a careful man. He spent 38 years at the paper mill, took every extra shift they'd give him, and put a little aside every single payday like it was a religion. When the mill offered early buyouts, he took the lump sum and rolled it into something safe and let it sit. By the time he passed, between his pension, the life insurance, and the savings, I was what the bank calls comfortable. Not flashy, just safe. Safe enough that I never had to worry. Safe enough, it turned out, that other people stopped worrying too. I have one child, a daughter. I'll call her my girl, because even now, after everything, that's still the word my heart reaches for first. She was a colicky baby and a stubborn teenager and a woman who, somewhere in her 40s, decided that the natural order of the world was that I gave and she received. Her husband, I'll just call my son-in-law, because honestly, the man never gave me much else to call him by. In 12 years of marriage, I don't think he ever once asked how I was doing without a number attached to the question. They live an hour away, in a big new house in a development outside Charlotte where all the homes look the same and the lawns are too green to be honest. 2 boys, my grandsons, 11 and 9. And Lord, those boys. When they were little, they'd run to the door when my car pulled up, shouting, "Grandma's here! Grandma's here!" and bury their faces in my coat. That sound. I'd have driven through a snowstorm for that sound. I'd have driven through a snowstorm for that sound. I did, more than once. The mortgage thing started innocent enough, the way these things do. About 3 years ago, my daughter called me crying. My son-in-law's commission job had dried up. The bank was threatening. The boys would have to switch schools mid-year. Could I help, just for a few months, just until things turned around? And what was I going to do? Let my grandsons get pulled out of school? I called the bank and set up the payment from my account, just for a few months. A few months became a year became 3. I paid that mortgage every single month, $2,400, the same as a second rent I never lived in. And somewhere along the way, it stopped being a favor and became the weather. Just something that happened. Nobody thanked me any more than you thank the sun for coming up. I covered the boys' summer camps, their dental work when the insurance lapsed. Christmas every year, I'd hand my daughter an envelope because she said the boys would be heartbroken otherwise. And what kind of grandmother wants to break a child's heart? I told myself I was being generous. I want you to know I'm not naive about what I really was. I was buying something. I was buying the right to still be needed, because a needed woman doesn't have to wonder if she's wanted. The shift was so gradual I can't point to the day it happened, but I noticed the calls changed. They used to call to talk. Then they only called when something was due. I'd pick up all bright and happy, "Hi, sweetheart," and there'd be a pause, that little pause, before she got to the real reason. "Camp deposits due Friday, Mom. The orthodontist needs the second half. The HOA went up." I started dreading the phone, my own daughter's name on the screen, and my stomach would drop because I knew it meant a number was coming. The Sunday dinners stopped first. Then the boys stopped coming to the phone. "They're busy with their friends, Mom, you know how it is." Then my daughter stopped pretending to ask about me at all. I'd drive that hour to Charlotte for a birthday party and stand in the kitchen like hired help, and my son-in-law would walk past me to the cooler without so much as a hello. I'd drive the hour home in the dark, and Walt's empty seat beside me had never felt emptier. Now, about my birthday. I turned 73 on a Tuesday in early May. I'm not a woman who needs a fuss. But I'll admit, I sat by the phone that day. I made myself a little cake, yellow, with the chocolate frosting Walt always liked, and I set 2 plates out of habit before I caught myself and put one back. Nobody called. Not my daughter, not the boys, not a soul. I told myself everyone's busy, it's a weekday, it'll come tomorrow. It came 11 days later. A text. Happy belated B-Day, Mom. Crazy. Busy lately. Hey, did the camp check go out yet? Deposits due Monday. I read it standing at my kitchen counter. I read it 3 times, and the strangest thing happened. I didn't cry. I'd cried plenty over them by then, more than I'll admit. This time something in me just went very still and very cold and very clear, like the air right before the first real snow. I want you to understand, it wasn't the forgotten birthday. People forget birthdays. It was the smiley face. That little upside-down smiley face she put after crazy busy, like the whole thing was a cute little joke, my whole self folded down into an afterthought between 2 errands. And then, before the hurt could even land, the ask. The check. Always the check. I put the phone face down on the counter. I poured myself a cup of coffee I didn't want, and I did something I had never once done in 3 years. I sat down at Walt's old desk, opened my laptop, logged into the bank, and I canceled the automatic mortgage payment scheduled for the 1st of the month. Then I canceled the camp deposit I'd already queued. My hand wasn't even shaking. I felt, for the first time and longer than I could remember, like the master of my own house. Then I poured the second cup of coffee, the one I'd made out of habit, down the drain, and I went out to the porch and sat in Walt's chair and watched the light go down over the mountains. I slept that night like a stone. The quiet lasted exactly until the bank's payment date came and went. I imagined somewhere in Charlotte an automatic withdrawal failed to withdraw. The first call came at 8:40 in the morning. I let it ring. Then another. Then a text. All caps. Mom, the mortgage didn't come out. Did something happen with your account? Did something happen with your account? Call me. Concern for me, you'll notice, framed entirely as concern about the account. By noon, she'd called 14 times. By the time the sun went down, it was 31. I sat on my porch with a glass of sweet tea and I watched my phone light up and go dark, like a little fire had finally stopped feeding. I'm not proud of how good it felt, but I won't lie to you and say it didn't. I answered on the 2nd day. Not because I'd softened, but because I had things to say, and I wanted to say them to a person, not a voicemail. She started before I even finished hello. Was I all right? Was it a stroke? Was it the start of something? And there it was again, that word, the one I'd started to hear underneath everything they said. Something. As in, was something wrong with my mind? There's nothing wrong with me, I told her. I canceled the payment myself, on purpose. The silence on the line was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. Then it all came out of her in a rush. How could I? What about the boys? Did I want them out on the street? What had gotten into me? And I just listened. I let her run all the way down like a clock unwinding, and when she finally stopped, I said the thing I'd been practicing on the porch. You forgot my birthday for 11 days, and the first thing you said to me was about a check. I've decided I'm done being a check. If you want to talk to your mother, I'm right here. I always have been. But the money is finished, she hung up on me. The next few weeks, I learned exactly how much my daughter and her husband were willing to do for money, and exactly how little they'd ever been willing to do for me. Because the performance started almost immediately, and it would have been funny if it hadn't broken what was left of my heart. Day 3, flowers arrived. A big, showy arrangement, the kind from the expensive shop, with a card that said, "We love you, Mom, let's talk." This from a woman who didn't know whether I liked lilies or roses, because she'd never once asked. I put them in water. I'm not a monster. They were pretty. Day 5, my son-in-law called me. Him. In 12 years, I could count our phone conversations on one hand. He was all warmth, all mom this and mom that, asking about my garden, my health, my plans for the summer, like a man reading from a card. He wondered real casual if maybe I'd been feeling overwhelmed lately. Forgetful even. It happens to all of us, he said gently. And there it was a 3rd time. The seed, planted soft and friendly. Maybe Grandma's just confused. Day 8, the boys called. Together, on speakerphone, you could hear it. My grandsons, who hadn't dialed my number on their own in 2 years, suddenly reciting how much they loved me and missed me and wanted to come stay for a whole week this summer. My 9-year-old used the word cherish. Cherish. That boy has never cherished anything in his life that didn't have batteries in it. I listened to my daughter's whisper just off the mic, feeding him the lines, and I had to set the phone down on the table and breathe for a second. They had put my babies up to it. They'd taken the two purest things I had left in this world and turned them into salesmen. I told the boys I loved them, because I do, and that's not their fault. None of it is. And then I told my daughter, who I knew was right there, when you'd like to call me as my daughter instead of as a creditor, I'll be glad to hear from you. And I hung up gentle. I didn't slam it. Walt always said you can tell more about a person from how they put a phone down than how they pick it up. Now, here's where it stopped being sad and started being something darker, and I almost didn't see it coming. About 2 weeks into all this, I got a call from an old friend of mine, a woman I've known since church choir 30 years back. Her son's a lawyer, and she told me, careful and quiet the way you tell someone bad news, that she'd run into my daughter at the grocery, and my daughter had told her eyes all welled up that she was so worried about Mom lately, that I'd been saying strange things, forgetting people, and that the family was looking into options to make sure she's protected. Looking into options to protect me. I knew exactly what those words meant. I'd watched it happen to Walt's own sister years ago. They were laying the track for a conservatorship, guardianship. They were going around to everyone who knew me, sweet as pie, planting the story that the old woman was losing her grip, so that when they went to a judge to take legal control of my money and my decisions, there'd be a whole choir ready to nod along. The forgotten birthday, the canceled payment they reframe as erratic behavior. It was all of a piece. They didn't just want my money. They wanted my voice. I sat with that a long time. There's a particular kind of cold that comes over you when you understand that the child you carried, the child whose fevers you sat up through, is calmly building a case that you've lost your mind. I won't dress it up. It nearly took me apart. But I am Walt's wife, and Walt did not raise a wife who folds. The next morning I drove myself capable as you please to my church friend's son, the lawyer. And I laid the whole thing out. He was kind and he was sharp, and the first thing he did was send me to get a clean bill of cognitive health from my own doctor, dated and documented before anyone could claim otherwise. I aced it, by the way. The doctor laughed and said I was sharper than half her staff. Then the lawyer helped me put my house, my accounts, everything, into an arrangement they couldn't touch, with a trust and a clear directive in my own steady hand. He kept a copy of everything, including a recording made legal and proper in my state of my son-in-law's next checking-in call, in which the man flat out suggested that if I just let them help manage things, all this stress could go away. I had the choir get quiet real fast after that. One letter from a lawyer can do wonders for a family's memory of how sharp Grandma really is. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I'd cut them off clean and live out my days on my porch with Walt's glasses on the windowsill and call it even. But families aren't accounting ledgers, and the part of this story that surprised me most hadn't happened yet. It was my older grandson, the 11-year-old. He called me one evening, late, on a phone I didn't recognize. Turned out he'd borrowed a friend's because he didn't want his folks to know. And this boy, this serious, quiet boy who looks so much like Walt it stops my breath sometimes, he said, "Grandma, are you sick? Mom said you're sick in your head and that's why you got mad at us." And I had a choice right there. I could have told him the truth, the whole ugly truth about his parents. Lord knows part of me wanted to, but he was 11. So I said, "Baby, Grandma is healthy as a horse. I'm not sick, not one bit. I just had to set some rules with your mom and dad about money, and grown-ups don't always like rules." He was quiet a second. Then he said, "I told them you weren't crazy. I told them you remember everything. You remembered I don't like the crust on my sandwiches and Mom always forgets. And then, smaller, I miss coming to your house." I had to hold the phone away from my face so he wouldn't hear me. Out of the mouths of children, you know. He hadn't been coached. Coached children don't bring up sandwich crusts. So I made him a deal, that boy and me. I told him my door was always open to him and his brother, that nothing on God's earth would change that, money or no money. And I started, quiet and careful, just the two of us, talking on that borrowed phone once a week. He'd tell me about his baseball, and I'd tell him about his grandpa Walt, all the stories I'd been saving up that nobody ever sat still long enough to hear. I gave that boy's grandfather, a piece at a time. That, I think, was worth more than every check I ever wrote. Months went by. The flowers stopped. The fake calls stopped. Once they understood the lawyer was real and the conservatorship was dead in the water before it ever started. For a while there was just silence, and I made my peace with it. I had my porch, my church, my Tuesday lunches with the choir ladies, and my grandson's voice once a week. It was a smaller life, but it was mine, every inch of it, and nobody was running a tab on it. And then, near about Thanksgiving, my daughter showed up at my door, alone. No flowers, no husband, no script. She stood on Walt's porch, and she looked older than I remembered, and tired. And for the first time in years, she looked at me like I was a person and not a balance. She said, "I'm not here for money." I let her in. I made coffee, and she sat at my kitchen table and she cried, real crying, the ugly kind. And she told me the truth at last, that they were drowning. Credit cards, a bad investment my son-in-law had made and hidden. The house they couldn't actually afford and never could. That when I cut them off, it had all come down at once. That the conservatorship had been his idea. But she'd gone along with it, and she'd hated herself every single day since. And that her own son, my grandson, had looked at her one night and said, "You lied about Grandma," and she hadn't been able to answer him. I didn't rush to comfort her. I want you to know that. The old me would have had the checkbook out before she finished the sentence, patting her hand, fixing it, buying back the warmth. I just let her sit in it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to not rescue them from the consequences of who they've been. "I don't want your money," she said again, wiping her face. "I want to know if there's any way back to you." And I told her the truth. I said there might be, but it wouldn't be the old way. The old way had nearly cost me my mind and my dignity and my own daughter besides. I told her if she wanted her mother, she could have her mother. She could have her mother. But she could never again have my bank account, and she'd have to come to my table as family, not as a debtor. I told her they'd have to sell the too big house and live within what they actually earned, and that I'd help her find a smaller place, but I would not pay for it. And I told her the boys were welcome here any day of the week, money or no money, forever, no conditions, because they were never the ones who owed me anything. She agreed to all of it, crying the whole time, but she agreed. And here's the thing I've learned to watch for now. I didn't believe her just because she said it. I believe what people do, not what they swear. So we started small. A Sunday dinner. Then another. They sold that house in the spring and moved into a sensible little place 20 minutes closer to me, and my son-in-law, to his credit, finally got a steady job and kept it. I keep my eyes open. The lawyer still has every document. Walt would have insisted on that, and Walt was right about most things. But last Sunday, I had all 4 of them at my table. My daughter, who washed the dishes after without being asked. My son-in-law, who fixed the squeaky board on the porch step Walt never got around to. And my 2 boys, my grandsons, fighting over the last piece of yellow cake with chocolate frosting. The very same cake I'd once eaten alone on a birthday. Nobody remembered. After they left, I sat out on the porch in Walt's chair in the cool evening, and I picked up his reading glasses off the windowsill, and I finally put them in the drawer where they belong. Not because I'm letting him go, because I think he'd finally seen what he needed to see. That the woman he left behind learned, at 73, the one lesson he never got the chance to teach her. That love and money are not the same thing. That the most generous word a mother ever learns to say is no. And that you can lose everything you thought held a family together, and find out the family was never in the money at all. It was in a quiet boy who remembered the crust on his sandwiches, and a tired woman who finally drove an hour the other direction, just to say she was sorry. If you've ever had to choose between being needed and being respected, between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I'd truly like to know. Tell me where you're watching from, and tell me, would you have answered the phone? For 3 years I told myself that paying that mortgage was love. It wasn't. It was fear wearing love's coat. I was so afraid of being set aside that I kept buying my way back into a family that had already learned to take me for granted. And the hard truth I had to face sitting at Walt's old desk that morning is that I taught them to treat me that way. Every check I wrote without being thanked, every birthday I let slide so I wouldn't seem needy, every hour I drove to be ignored. I was the one writing the rules. You cannot be furious at people for following a lesson you spent years teaching them. The cause was mine before the consequence was theirs. What turned it around wasn't the money, and it wasn't even the cutting off. It was three things I had to grow at 73 that I should have grown long before. The first was the plain decency to stop confusing generosity with self-erasure. To understand that letting someone use you isn't kindness to them, it's cowardice toward yourself. And it raises children and grandchildren who never learn that love has any weight at all. The second was the clear-eyed sense to see what was actually happening, to recognize that is something wrong with your mind was not concern, it was a strategy, and to act on what I saw instead of what I wished were true. I got the doctor's letter, I got the lawyer. I stopped hoping and started thinking. And the third was the backbone, to hold the line through every flower, every scripted phone call, every tear at my kitchen table, to let my own daughter sit in her consequences without rushing to rescue her, which was the single hardest thing I have ever done as a mother. Because here is what I learned, and I give a great deal to have learned it younger. When you only have decency, people walk on you. When you only have cleverness, you turn cold. When you only have toughness, you turn cool. You need all three pulling together, a good heart, a clear head, and a strong spine, or you'll spend your life either being robbed or doing the robbing. The day I finally had all three at once was the day my family started to mend, not because I bought them back, but because for the first time they met a woman they couldn't move. My daughter washes my dishes now. My grandson tells me about his baseball and his sandwich crusts. None of it can be bought, and none of it would have come if I'd kept paying. The most loving word I ever said to my child was no. It cost me a few sleepless months and gave me back the rest of my life. If you take one thing from an old woman on a porch in the mountains, let it be that you can be generous and still be respected, but only if you're brave enough to make people earn the second one instead of confusing it with the first.